this parameter, the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch, is for the detection of some high-profile aquatic invasive plants, and you'll see our acronym for that is EAPW. You've seen me now throughout the day. So again, my name is Erick Elgin, work for MSU Extension, and I'm actually going to be co-presenting this with Joe, as the two of us have been working on the Plant Watch together for a few years now. And I should mention the first half of the presentation is just to give us a sense of what the program is, or what the parameter is, and then go into how to identify our key species. And then Joe will be going into the protocol in depth in the second half. So aquatic invasive plants, they can be very disruptive. And you can see from these pictures, the big disruption here is that they have the potential to create a large amount of biomass in a short amount of time. And that biomass causes a lot of issues. So it can reduce diversity by reducing light penetration, which will exclude other native aquatic plants. It could also change the system enough where certain fish species or bird species can no longer utilize that habitat. So they have a lot of impact on the diversity, including the fisheries. And we know from several studies that the presence of certain invasive species, invasive plants, can reduce property values. And if you do decide that you want to use control measures or management and try to reduce the population or eradicate a population of invasive plants, control can be quite expensive. As you can see here, here's an estimate for herbicide control costs can be between $200 to $2,000 per acre of treatment. So how does the Plant Watch fit into this world of invasive species or invasive plants? And what it is that this protocol is an early detection protocol, meaning we are out there looking around for these specific plants before they are a big problem. Because you can look at these pictures side by side, and I would say, so here, right here, this plant right here, that is starry stonewort. And these plants around here are the native lookalike called Cara. So would you rather find in your lake a small patch like this, or in this picture on the right, this texture that you see here on the bottom of the lake, that is also starry stonewort, but in an established patch. So if you can find a species in a lake before it becomes widespread, the control and management, the rapid response can be successful, where treatment can be cheap and also very successful and potentially eradicate. Where once a species gets established, it becomes very difficult to manage and sometimes impossible to eradicate. So getting involved with the Plant Watch hopefully gives you that chance to find the species before it's established. So where is monitoring most valuable for early detection? Well, that's with lakes with no known invasive plants. So if you do not have any invasive plants known in your water body, in your lake, this is a great parameter for you. Another type of lake are lakes that are managing existing populations of invasive plants and have them under good control. So if they've been reduced, you might want to find a satellite population, a few plants that pop up, a small patch, excuse me, a small patch that pops up somewhere else. You can find it real quick and then start to control it. Less valuable for lakes with lots of invasive plants covering large areas, and the but is big, it can still help you identify new invasions that might come in. So even if you have Eurasian milfoil, for example, ringing your lake, and there's a lot of it, you can still keep an eye out for other species that might come in, and so that doesn't equally become a problem. Just to throw out there, there's always questions about, well, if your lake is already being treated and you have, for example, a company out there who does surveys before they treat, those surveys are typically not early detection surveys. And so they're not focused in on key areas that can catch an invasive species quickly. So there's still value in the plant watch because you're going into key areas trying to find these plants. Also, having this knowledge of how to identify these species and this protocol just gets another set of eyes on the water, so that even though your best company is out there, just having a team of volunteers on the lake who know their invasive plants can really be helpful in catching new invasions. So what's the key to early detection? That is plant identification. So for the plant watch, we're not requiring you to have all the knowledge of aquatic invasive plant or aquatic plant ID. There's actually quite a few native species in our lakes here in Michigan, but we do ask for the identification of these key invasive species. So that's Eurasian water milfoil, curly-leaf pondweed, starry stonewort, hydrilla, and European frogbit. Some of these species, like Eurasian milfoil and curly-leaf pondweed, have been in Michigan for a very long time. Some of them only a couple decades with starry stonewort. Some are not found at all with hydrilla, but are a massive threat. And European frogbit, which is kind of a newcomer to our inland lakes in the past few years. For help, in addition to our training and our different resources, we have a Michigan Boater's Guide to Selected Invasive Aquatic Plants. As a new volunteer, you will get these shipped to you, it's a great resource because it can get wet, it can sit in your boat. It's a great thing that you can have while you're out there surveying. And if you need additional ones, you can buy additional ones at the MSU Extension bookstore. We also have videos. A great video was made a few years ago that go over the program description and ID tips and tricks, sampling protocols, and all of that can be found on the lake training page on MiCorps.net. So let's meet the exotics, and we're gonna try, by the end of today's presentation, I hope you have a confidence that you can identify these 5 species well. Starting off, our list is Eurasian water milfoil. There's actually a handful of native milfoils in the state, and so they can be easily confused, but it can also easily be separated out. And so Eurasian water milfoil, the key characters to identify is that when you pull this plant out of the water, it has these feather-like leaves, or it looks like a fern. It could be considered a kid's Christmas tree. I've heard that description. And so what you're seeing here is, so this structure right here is the leaf. So that's what we're saying looks like a feather. Now, you would look at the leaf arrangement. So that just is describing how the leaves are coming off of the stem. So here's a stem, and look at these leaves all coming off. So there's 4 leaves right here coming out of this one node, and it's coming from all the way around the stem. So that is considered whorled. Now, if it was to be alternate, I'll just show you with my hands. Hopefully this shows up. If this is the stem, here's one leaf that would come off this way and another leaf that would come off this way. That would be considered alternate. So just to give you a contrast between alternate leaf arrangement compared to whorled, like you see on the screen. Okay, so we have feather-like leaves. We now see whorled leaf arrangement. Now we look at the numbers of leaflets. So that's what this arrow is pointing to. So one of these stringy structures is called the leaflet. And so what we ask is you count one side of here. So you would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, it looks like, or about 16. So now we have, with that information, those 3 pieces of information, you would be holding Eurasian water milfoil. So again, you pull a plant out of the water, It looks like it has feather-like leaves. The leaves are all coming out whorled around the stem, and it has more than 12 leaflets on one side. That's Eurasian water milfoil. Another key kind of secondary characteristic is that leaves are limp out of the water. So when you pull the plant out of the water, Eurasian milfoil, compared to the native milfoils, just collapse over your hand and over your finger, where some of the native milfoils, the leaves will still stay robust and stick up off of your hand. Now that's, again, not a primary character, but something that will help. So here's a good comparison between the whorls. So, we're looking at the stem, and we've cut it so we can look at the cross section here. We have 4 leaves here and 4 leaves here. You can see how the native milfoils look similar. They still have feather-like leaves, but there's less than 12 leaflets per leaf. Now, as some of you know, milfoils, Eurasian milfoil does hybridize with native milfoils, and that's unfortunate. And there's lots of management implications of this hybrid, but one of the, for identification purposes, it causes a big headache. You can't identify hybrid milfoil botanically at 100%. There's too much, they share too many characters between the native and the Eurasian milfoil. So in order to get an accurate identification, you'd have to send in a sample to get genetically tested, which there is a lab out of Montana State that you can send your milfoil samples to get them tested. Okay, so to now kind of try to get the characters in, I just want to show you some other lookalikes that are not Eurasian milfoil. So these are not Eurasian milfoil. Here's a nice cross-section of a native milfoil. You can see that this looks like a feather, but when you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there's 8 leaflets, so under 12. So this is a native milfoil, not Eurasian. How about this center one? This is one leaf of what's called bladderwort. So this is not Eurasian milfoil. First of all, they have, if you look closely, there's these little bladders. Those are actually, these are carnivorous plants. Those are where they consume and digest little invertebrates in the water. And then also not just the bladders, there's a lot more branching here. As you can see, this is like, this one leaf is very feather-like, where there's a lot more branching occurring. So that is not Eurasian milfoil. This is common bladderwort. And then here's another leaf, another plant that people get confused with Eurasian milfoil frequently, and this is called coontail. But if you look closely, so what I've circled here, this is one of the leaves, and it looks like a wishbone. So it doesn't look like a feather at all. It looks like a wishbone, and that's coontail. So these are similar species, but are not Eurasian milfoil. So it's the end of the day, but we have some quizzes. And Joe is going to put up a poll here in a moment. And so if you can answer, which plant is Eurasian milfoil, A or B?
And you can move the poll out of the way if it's in front of the pictures for you.
Thank you. I'll just wait just a moment as it fills out. Really key to look at the number of leaflets. So it looks like it's slowing down. And let's see, share results. Attendees are now viewing the poll results. Perfect. As you can see, you guys are right. The majority of you are right. So B is the correct answer. This is Eurasian milfoil. This, taking a quick look, this looks like northern water milfoil. So if you look here, it's a little zoomed out, but you can see there's a lot of leaflets here compared to here, which is under 12. Okay, next species, curlyleaf pondweed. Curlyleaf pondweed has been in Michigan for over 100 years. In some lakes, it's prolific. And in other lakes here in Michigan, we see them as just members of the plant community and not to be as big of a concern. But it still has the potential. So this is how you identify this plant. So you pull a plant out of the water. It has these ribbon-like leaves with these like 3/8 inch wide leaves that are 2 to 3 inches long. When you look at that leaf, it has a very prominent midvein. And so you can see right here. So here's that prominent midvein and also this ribbon-like leaf. You also look at the leaf arrangement. So remember that world leaf arrangement that we were showing with the Eurasian milfoil? This is now alternate leaf arrangement. So a leaf coming out on one side and then down a little bit or up a little bit, it'd be coming out the other. And then something that's very key is that this plant has, or this leaf has a serrated edge. So with those characteristics, so that alternate leaf arrangement, prominent midvein, and a serrated leaf margin, that is curlyleaf pondweed. Out of all the aquatic plants out there, this is like the largest plant. So this can be quite large. It's the only one with a serrated leaf. So that can be really helpful. And you can see this with the naked eye. One of my recommendations is that sometimes it can be kind of tough. So if you would hold it up into the sky, not into the sun, but up into the sky to create contrast, you'll be able to see those serrations fairly easily. But if you do use a simple magnifying glass can really show it. So the plants you see here, the 3 species, these are not curlyleaf pondweed, but these 2 are other pondweeds, and this is a different group altogether. But there are some easily confusable plants here, but I'll show you why. So this is variable leaf pondweed. It has lots of branching, first of all. So there's a branch here, branch here, branch here. Curlyleaf pondweed can branch, but this is a lot more prolific branching. And if you would look at the edge of this leaf, there is no serration. So there are no teeth. So this is not curlyleaf pondweed. This one is another easily confusable plant with it. We have alternate leaf arrangement. We have a prominent midvein, but then and also we have this wavy appearance. So actually that's something I didn't mention. I should come back to this one. Another character that makes this plant easily identifiable is the lasagna noodles. So here's that curly, the waviness that you see on the edge of this plant. Sometimes in the springtime, you can find plants that are completely straight and don't have those waves, but most of the time they do, and so it's an easy giveaway. But now, as you can see, some of them have a ripple, maybe not as tight of a lasagna noodle edge as you saw in the previous picture. But if you look closely, there are no serrations. And then here's a good one just to show this is another common plant. And what you can see, this is water stargrass, for example. And this one does not have a prominent midvein, or it doesn't have teeth. So no prominent midvein and no teeth. So this is not curlyleaf pondweed. And by the way, this is white stem pondweed in the center. So another poll question. This is the large picture of it, and then this is a zoomed in of the leaf here and here. Which plant is curlyleaf pondweed? Okay, we're starting to slow down now. You all did very well. B B is curlyleaf pondweed. If you look closely here, I tried to zoom in enough, you can see these small teeth on the leaf edge. So we have alternate leaf arrangement, we have a prominent midvein, and we have teeth on the edge. Where in comparison, this is another pondweed that we have in Michigan, but we do not see serrations. Now you do see some maybe some stuff potentially on the sides here, and that's algae that has been growing on the leaf surface that maybe gives it a rough looking edge. Something else to note is that curlyleaf pondweed creates winter buds, and along with other species do too, but this is very characteristic. This right here that I'm circling is called a winter bud. If you were to squeeze it, it's really hard, and if you looked at it closely, it has really obvious teeth on there. That's the only pondweed that has that type of winter bud in Michigan. Starry stonewort. This is a macroalgae. It's not a flowering plant at all, but an algae, but it's a large algae that you can see and lift up. It's not microscopic. This is probably one of the hardest plants to identify. It can be really easy, but can be very difficult at the same time. The one characteristic and how it gets its name is the starry bulbul. And this is a bulbul right here, so you can see the scale of it in this finger. This is a bulbul. It looks like a star, so that's where it gets its starry stonewort name. These are reproductive structures that are created at or below the sediment. And if you find these, no other plant in Michigan has them, has anything like this. So that would be starry stonewort. So easy in that way. But if you don't have the bulbul, it becomes quite difficult. And what you start to look for is this right here where I'm circling. So this is a branchlet, and as you can see, it's not quite as long as this branch here. So it's uneven branching. So if you find a plant that looks like this, and it has this uneven branching, that is likely starry stonewort. But I would encourage you to try to collect some more of the plant to find these bulbils for 100% confirmation. Here's another example of that uneven branching. A lookalike that is not starry stonewort is the big group of plants called Cara or muskgrass. So anybody who's thrown an anchor in a lake here in Michigan and pulled it up, or have caught their lures on some plants, have likely smelled these. The common name muskgrass is there because it has a really potent lake smell. And so this plant, it looks very similar. It's in the same family as starry stonewort, but it has a pungent smell, most of them. It's rougher feel. It's also it can get tall, but it's not as large branching wise. And what's really key is it does not have star bulbils. It has bulbils, but they're completely circular. They're not stars, so they do not have star bulbils. And another group is called Nitella, not Nutella, Nitella. And that is also very similar, but instead of the uneven branching that you have in starry stonewort, these will be branching, but they'll all be even. And of course, no star bulbils. So here's our next quiz. Which one is starry stonewort, A or B? Okay, good job, everyone. Share results. Yes, A is starry stonewort. So it's kind of tough to see from this picture, but with this star-shaped bulbul, that's starry stonewort. So this is a great picture of bulbils from Cara that I believe Joe took. It's great. So these are the bulbils, these are the reproductive structures of Cara, but as you can see, they're circular where the starry stonewort is a star-like structure. Moving on to hydrilla. Hydrilla has not been found in the state of Michigan yet, and we hope it doesn't. This is one of the most invasive aquatic plants in the world and causes tremendous amount of problems to the ecosystem, to our recreation. They're a big problem. And as you can see from this map, it's getting close. I believe the closest is in northern Ohio. There was a population in Indiana, but I believe that is now eradicated. But it took millions of dollars and years to eradicate. So anyways, how do you identify hydrilla? What you look at is the whorl. So again, those leaves are all coming out of a whorl on the stem, and you will have 4 to 8 leaves per whorl. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 whorls or 5 leaves per whorl. And when you look at the edges of the leaf, they'll be serrated. So really sharp teeth. And what's also a great character is if you lift that leaf up, and this picture kind of shows it, it has teeth attached to the midvein on the underside of the leaf. So there are these projections, little teeth, little spikes coming out of the underside of the leaf. This plant looks like one of our, a very common native plant called Elodea. And so here's a side-by-side kind of drawn comparison. So on the left, we have hydrilla. So again, here's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is looking, these 2 teeth right there, that's coming out of the backside of the leaf. Comparing that to our native Elodea, which is very common, and it typically has only 3 leaves at each node. So 1, 2, 3. And you can't see easily identifiable serrations either. And they do not have teeth on the backside. So here's a zoomed in picture. This is not hydrilla. This is Elodea, our native Canada waterweed is what the name is. And typically only 3 leaves per whorl, although you can sometimes have 2 and sometimes have 4 or 5, but that sometimes is very unique. So you might have more leaves up here, but when you start looking at the whole stem, you will typically then find 3. Whereas in hydrilla, you won't be finding that, or be very uncommon. So which plant is hydrilla, A or B? And Joe will be getting that poll up shortly. Okay, good job, everybody. You're right. A is hydrilla. And I hope it wasn't just because I showed you this picture before. I hope it was because you're like, oh yeah, more than 4 or 5 leaves per whorl and serrations. This is another exotic plant here in Michigan. Spiny naiad is the common name. The leaves that you can see, there's obviously some teeth, but the teeth are quite different. The leaves aren't coming off totally in whorls. And also there's teeth coming out all over the place, including the stem, which is not a character of hydrilla. And now the new threat, European frogbit. Just a little bit more on this plant, because we're starting to see this as a threat across the state. As we've seen European frogbit in the state for quite some time, since the late 90s, and it has been really pretty much on the coastlines of Lake Erie, Lake St. Clair, and Lake Huron. But over the last couple years, I think 2016 was the year when we saw it jump entirely to Reed's Lake in Grand Rapids in Kent County. And then since 2016, we've started to see it pop up in the lower Grand River, Pentwater Lake, Dansville Wildlife Management Area, or State Game Area, and also in the Pinckney regions in Washtenaw County, and in some areas of some storm retention ponds in, I believe it's Wayne County. Might also be Oakland. So this is how you identify frogbit. What's nice is it is a free floating plant. And what I mean by free floating, rosette. So a rosette is referring to all the leaves and all the stems and all the roots are coming from one spot. So all the leaves connect to right here. And it's free floating, so the roots dangle below. Now in really shallow water, it can be rooted in the mud, but it's typically free floating. So these roots are just dangling below. The leaves are fairly small, between 2 to 3 inches, and look like kind of heart-shaped leaves. And the flowers are 3 white petals with some yellow interior anthers. So this is a comparison of what it can look like from your boat, where here's our native water lily, our native white water lily. These are rooted in the sediment. So if you yanked on them, you would feel resistance to pulling them up. But you can see that there's a lot of variation in size. So here are some very small ones. So check if they're rooted. And then here, because European frogbit is free floating, it's usually shoved up against the shoreline, particularly in the emergent vegetation. And in this case, it's in narrowleaf cattail. So which plant is European frogbit, A or B? Judging by these polls and these little quizzes, all of you are going to be pros at identification. So good job. Yep, this is European frogbit on the left on A. The big difference here, just from this picture, what you can see is this is a ruler. So if you sign up for the Plant Watch, you get a laminated sheet with these rulers on there. And you see this is multiple inches compared to at most 3 inches that we see for European frogbit. This will also have a completely different flower. It's more sharp here and here. And although it's white, it's completely different. This is our yellow or our white water lily. Now, of course, there's a threat of other invasive plants always. This is a list that's out there that's been developed by the state of Michigan called the Michigan Watch List species. As you can see, hydrilla is on there as well as European frogbit, but there's other species out there. So if you type in Michigan Watch List species or go to the Michigan Invasive Species website, you can find this list and you'll be help with identification. These plants, again, are either never detected in the wild or have limited distribution and have a high potential for negative impacts. So although we don't train you specifically to identify these plants, if you see anything that's strange that you've never seen on your lake before, don't hesitate to contact Joe or I, or contact the state of Michigan with your find. So that's all for the identification portion, and Joe is going to take over from here. Are there any questions now, or do we want to wait?
I've been able to handle most of the questions in the chat, I think. So
Perfect.
we've been able to do that pretty well. One thing I'll note, one of the questions that came in was more about invasive plant management and control. And I gave Eric some links to the state's Aquatic and Nuisance Control Program and also the state's invasive species pages. Do you have any other places where you would suggest people look for that information, or would you send them to those same places?
I would send them to the same places. There's a few others that you can find, and I'll Joe, while you're talking, I can take a quick peek and I can throw some of the common ones up.
Right. Yeah, I made clear, that's a great topic and great questions. It's just not something we have time to dig into here.
Right.
Yeah, well, thanks, Eric. I think we can move on to this second part. And I've
Perfect.
got a little bit of my voice back from Score the Shore. So I'm ready to take over. Eric, you don't mind advancing slides for me? All right. Apparently not, because he did that. All right. So now we're going to talk about the procedures for doing these surveys. And one thing I want to do before we get into that is I want to emphasize that the invasive species are really, in most lakes, a small part or not even a part of the plant community. There is the native plants in our lakes are incredibly important and valuable and beautiful parts of our lake ecosystems. And so although we're focused on some of the baddies for this presentation, we hope that you'll take some time when you're out on the water to check out all the really beautiful native plants that are there, like those pondweeds that Eric had in the background of his video there. All right, so the packet of paperwork that goes with the Exotic Plant Watch, you'll be able to find that on our website, the same page we've been sending you to the whole time. And so, you'll find things like the data form, instructions for building a sampling rake, which we'll look at in a minute. You can download a PDF of an invasive species identification guide, which we'll talk about. You can get and print out your own plant photography card that you can laminate yourself, but we'll get those to you as well. You'll see that watch list that Eric just mentioned that the state put together. And then finally, we have copies of a brochure about this program that a lot of our volunteers have found useful for spreading the word about the Exotic Plant Watch. Next slide, please. There's also some stuff that you'll want to provide. Of course, you'll need to be out on a boat to do the surveying and all of your safety equipment, and having an anchor is useful for this because you'll need to sit in one spot for a while to do the plant sampling in that location on the lake. So being able to sit tight is a good thing. And I'll say I've done plant sampling in a lot of different boats, from kayaks to fishing boats to pontoons, and pontoons are amazing boats for doing lake monitoring because you have that flat surface. It's stable. You can spread out. You can have a few people on there. But do keep in mind that plant sampling can get a little muddy. So sometimes people will put down, a tarp or something to protect the boat if you don't want to get, plants and maybe a little muck and stuff onto the seats of your boat. Bring your plant identification guides out with you. Having a depth map of your lake or a depth finder on your boat is helpful because plants don't grow in the deepest part of most lakes, but they will grow in some of those most shallow areas. A GPS unit is optional and useful for documenting the locations of things you find. Cameras are optional, but we really recommend that. Having pictures of what you find for verification, we can look at them and let you know for sure what you're looking at from good photos. So we'll talk about photography a little bit later. Having a weighted sounding line or some other way of determining the depth of where you're sampling is useful. Secchi discs actually work well for that if you've got a measured line on your Secchi disc. Having that sampling rake that we're going to look at. Ziploc bags. And a marker for labeling is really helpful because you're not always going to be confident in what a plant is when you're out there on the boat, and you might want to take it back to shore so you can look at it under better lighting, or when you're not, blowing around, you may want to do your sampling and then do the ID back at shore. So having a Ziploc bag that you can label with where you found the plant is really, really helpful. Trash bags. Also, you may pull up invasive plants, and we don't recommend throwing those invasives back in the lake, especially if you don't have a lot of invasive plants already in your lake. Throwing them back in, they may root and just carry on or even spread. So having trash bags on board is good. Clipboard for holding your data forms and your note paper. Copy of your procedures there to keep it handy so you know what you're doing. And of course, again, we repeat this every time, but a pencil or an indelible ink pen for writing, because regular ink pens will not serve you well if they get wet. Next slide. All right, here is the high-tech aquatic plant sampling tool that you will use to collect plants. And don't laugh, because that's what we use too. They work really well. And you can make these yourself by just taking a couple of garden rakes, cutting the handles off, bolting them together with C-bolts and a hose clamp, attaching an eye bolt, screwing it into one of the cutoff handles, and attaching a rope that you can throw. You'll get we have a copy of this diagram on the website, and these make really effective plant sampling tools. As you might imagine, if you've ever pulled up your anchor and it was covered with plants, you could imagine an anchor with, 40 strong teeth is going to collect even more plants. So this is our sampling tool that you can use. Next slide. All right, when to sample. People ask this a lot. When's the best time for us to get out and actually start looking for these invasive species? And really, the summer is the best time to go. You might not want to start much earlier than mid-June, because aquatic plants need a little time to take off. We've had an early spring this year, so if you're near the southern counties and you see that aquatic plants are really growing gangbusters early in June and you want to get out, you can definitely give it a shot. And one thing you'll find, especially in lakes that you're maybe aware of or concerned about, curly leaf pondweed. That plant in particular grows best early in the summer and actually will start to die back when it comes down to August and the hot part of the summer. It actually will go dormant at that point. And so some June sampling may be good, or even early July, for catching that curly leaf pondweed before it dies back. You don't have to do it all at once. You can spread it out across the course of the summer. Just record all the dates that you were out on your data sheet so we know when you were out sampling. And that's particularly useful if you're on a big lake or you're trying to do a lot of it yourself, because this can take some time. And so it's okay to spread it out over multiple days. Next slide. So where do I sample and how do I start? Go ahead and slide. All right, so having a map, getting your map of your lake, just like we would recommend for Score the Shore. Have a map of your lake and take a look at it. And what you're looking for are high risk areas for potential invasion. Next, click. Go ahead and click through. Thanks. So you're going to be looking for things like boat ramps. What's the number one way that invasive species get spread from lake to lake? On trailered boats. So those boat ramps can be high invasion risk areas. So you definitely want to do some surveying there. Public beaches and parks are also areas where you may see things being moved about and introduced into a lake. The inlets or outlets on a lake. You see there's a little cursor moving around an inlet stream there that goes into our example lake there. Things might be flowing in from other water bodies or wetland areas. And also look in quiet bays and coves, maybe a little outside of the main body of the lake, but those sheltered areas provide habitat for invasive plants to potentially take hold. Now, how do you actually sample? Here's an example of what we call a transect. And we encourage you to sample along a transect, which is an imaginary line perpendicular to shore. So this is an overhead image showing you a boat ramp. You see some cars parked there and stuff. And then there's this imaginary red line perpendicular to shore, and sample at a few different depths. So we know a boat ramp is a high risk area for invasive species. So we've set up our imaginary transect right alongside the boat ramp. And we're going to use our rake to sample in the shallower water, maybe around 3 feet deep, or maybe even a little shallower, and then go out a little further, maybe to about 8 feet deep, and sample again. And then you go out even further to maybe even about 15 feet deep and sample again there. Lakes vary as far as how deep plants will grow. It's based a lot on water quality and clarity, and also on what the lake bottom is like. But in a lot of lakes, on average, you go much below 15 feet in depth, and your aquatic plant community there, if any, isn't going to change a whole lot. So a lot of times looking in those shallow areas is important. And one thing that isn't noted here, but I want you to think about, is that European frog bit. And remember, Eric showed you those pictures, and it will be right up against the shoreline because it drifts. The wind will carry it in. So in addition to tossing rakes, which are great for collecting those submerged invasives, look right along the edge to see those little pads of European frog bit might be floating there. Next slide. How many transects do we recommend for each lake? Well, it varies by how big your lake is. If you're trying to cover your entire lake and do a thorough survey, here's our rule of thumb. If it's less than 100 acres in surface, maybe 5 to 15 transects will be sufficient. And as it gets bigger, 100 to 500 acres, you might want to increase that number to 15 to 30. If you have a big lake, over 50 acres, then you may wish to do up to 30 or even 50 transects. And I know that sounds like a lot. And we'll make a note right now, and I'll probably repeat it again, is that all data is useful data. So if you go out and you'd say, yep, I'm going to survey my lake. It's kind of a big lake, but I think I can get it done. And maybe I can get 2 or 3 of my neighbors to help. And the neighbors aren't really into it. And you end up having to do a lot of it on your own or just with one other person. You only get through, maybe 10 transects on a 500-acre lake. Don't give up and don't not send us your data, because that's important. Even if you only surveyed a few spots on your lake, that's useful information. And even if you didn't find anything that's useful information, we're going to talk about that too. But definitely don't think that it was a waste of time if you don't get to every transect you maybe wished you have. Instead, focus on those high risk areas and then fill in later. Next slide. So here's an example lake. And remember, we talked about how we may not see a lot of plant growth below 15 feet. That might be different on your lake, but that's just a rule of thumb. And here's an example 100-acre lake. And you can see it's got about 15 transects that have been set up. And notice there's a couple, number 2 and number 3 are right there at the boat launch area. And they're kind of close together, but that's okay. They don't have to be evenly spaced. There's also a little park with a stream flowing in. There's transects 12 and 13 are right near there. And then we've got a beach down there in the southeast corner around transects 5 and 6. Also are catching any invaders that might be coming in from there. So that's those are your high risk transects. So if I was figuring out my sampling plan, I might do those transects first, 2 and 3, 5 and 6, 12 and 13. And then as time allows, fill in with more, 7, 8, 9, 10, all of those other spots around the lake. There certainly could be invasives there. They just might not be as high of risk. Next slide. If you have an island, you can add transects there too. Just like we talked about with Score the Shore, and you can document the shoreline conditions there. If you have an island, might not have a coconut palm tree growing on it here in Michigan, but if you have an island in your lake, you can build some transects off of those too and do some surveying over there as well. Next slide. Here's my point again. Even some data are useful, and it's okay if you don't manage to cover the entire lake. Again, look at this example on Fremont Lake. We have transects at the boat launches. We surveyed that high risk area. We surveyed here at this inlet stream. We've got some outlet streams, and all along there that we got our high risk areas surveyed at least, and that's what's most important. So please, if you decide you want to do this, even if you don't get every inch of your lake surveyed, that's okay. We want to see what you find. Next slide. All right, we're going to look at the data form now. The typical top of a CLMP data form, just jot all of your location and volunteer information on, and there's a place for comments like any unusual conditions, and particularly if there's been any recent weed treatments. We recommend avoiding doing this plant watch immediately after a weed treatment. If you know you have Eurasian milfoil and you go and do a survey a week after all the milfoil was sprayed and is dying, it's not going to be an easy time to do that survey. You may wish to do it right before the survey, and then you'll know exactly where those plant beds are, and you can talk with your weed management company about making sure they hit those locations. Next slide. Here's the bottom of that same front sheet. And there's a really important thing I want to draw your attention to, that very first box. If no exotic aquatic plants are found during your survey, check here. And I think if you click, Eric, you'll get a little star. Yeah. So here, this surveyor didn't find any invasive plants. We still want that data. So please still report that because having no invasives is important data too. If you did find invasive plants, here's a place where you check the box of what species you found: Eurasian milfoil, curly-leaf pondweed, and so forth. And there's also a spot to write any other invasive plants that you want to know. Maybe you found something off the watch list that isn't one of our big 5 plants. Please write that in there. And then there's a reminder there saying what to include with your report, to include the completed data form, the lake map, any photographs of collected plants, and then reminds you to send it in to us. Here's the second page of the data form, and here's a table where you can document the results of your survey. And so as you can see here, let's just look at that first row, transect number 1. The volunteer was able to record latitude and longitude. They had a GPS unit they used. They found curly leaf pondweed and Eurasian water milfoil. They used an abbreviation, CLP and EWM. We'll know what that means. They noted that they took 2 questions or 2 photos. And then there's also a place for any notes that they have. And they just wrote, it was sparse. There was a few invasives there, but it wasn't like it was a huge thick patch of these species. And then it goes on to say transect 2, they didn't find any, and just go on along that way. Now you can create your own table if you don't want to handwrite in. We have people send us an Excel spreadsheet of the same information. That format doesn't matter as long as you give us this information. All right, taking pictures. Again, really important. And I'll warn you now, we're moving towards requiring photos. This year, we're not requiring them, but most of our volunteers send them in anyway. We really encourage you to do that because it's one thing to send us a piece of paper that says, I found hydrilla. We really want to see pictures if you think you found hydrilla, because that's a really big deal, right? You saw in the maps that it's not in Michigan yet, but if it is, we're definitely going to want to take action quickly. But the same is true for more common invasives like Eurasian milfoil. As you saw in Erick's section, it's easy to confuse Eurasian milfoil with some of the natives. If you send us some pictures, we're happy to look at them and let you know for sure. And you don't have to wait to send in photos to us to the end of the season when you do your report. We are happy to look at photos of things you find the day you find them. Send us photos. We've had people just happen to catch us when we're sitting at our computers when they're still out on the boat. They shot a picture on their phone of the plant, emailed it to us, and said, "Hey, is this Eurasian? Are we correct?" And we were able to confirm it while the volunteer was still out on the lake. We can't guarantee we'll always be that quick to respond, but we're happy to look at pictures of things that you found. But it's really important to take pictures of those important characteristics. Like we're going to need to see the milfoil leaf and its leaflets to be able to tell you what you're looking at. And the scale is really helpful. You can see using that laminated sheet like we do in the photo, lets us know how big these plants are. You'll want to record where they're from, which part of the lake they were from, and it will really help us a lot and really strengthen your report as well. There's that photography card again. Again, we will send you a laminated photography card with the scale on it. The other cool thing about it is on the back, it has pictures of all 5 of the invasive species as a helpful tip as well. And another thing I'll notice here, sorry, I paused, I know, but you can write with a dry erase marker right on that laminated card. So it says Elodea. Here, this person was like, this isn't hydrilla. I know it's the native Elodea. I'll write it on here for my own reference. And they include that in the report. And then when you're done, you can just wipe that dry erase writing right off and start fresh. All right, if you don't have the scale card handy, no pun intended, your hand will also work as a good scale. You can definitely, any of us looking at those pictures immediately knows the size of the plants in those pictures because we know how big a human hand is. All right, you want to make a map of where your transects are. So we know, and you know where you sampled. And it doesn't have to be high tech. Here's an example of one who took a paper map and drew with his ruler and pencil exactly where his transects are. You can see number 2 and 3 there. They have an island. And so they have some transects that go through there and they have numbers there. So when they turned in their report, they immediately, when I saw that they found something at site 2, I know exactly where site 2 is because they have that map included. Google Maps also works. Our volunteers on Stony Lake in Oceana County have for years submitted their data using Google Maps. And that works really nicely too. If you're more technologically inclined, you can actually create a map and label it with what species you found. You can play around with that and you can send us the link to the Google map. So that's another way to do it. And even using Google Earth, if you use that application at all, again, you can see here's a map one of our conservation district partners used and labeled with the little pins, site 1, site 2, site 3, and so on, which was a perfectly useful map for us as well. So do the way that fits for you, whether it's a hand-drawn map, which is, I would say, the majority of our volunteers will use. They'll send us a copy of a map that they drew on, but you can use these more high-tech approaches as well. All right, how to submit your data. The first thing is, just like any of the paper data sheets that you may be generating for the CLNP, you want to make sure you don't send us your originals and not make a copy for yourself. We're happy to get a copy. Just make sure that you have a copy as well. You'll want to enter your data into the data exchange online by the end of October. And then, of course, send that copied complete report to us. And that includes all of those things that were reminded on the data sheet. And yeah, I think we're all set there. All right. One thing we found when we first started this program, what has it been? Almost 10 years ago, the Exotic Plant Watch. It's the second newest program in the CLNP, is that a lot of people tried to take it on alone because they were already doing Secchi measurements and phosphorus sampling and a lot of the other CLNP work on their own. And they're like, well, I'll just add this to the suite of parameters that I do. But a lot of volunteers got hung up because it does take some time, and it helps to have, somebody driving the boat, somebody throwing the rake, somebody looking through the plants, somebody writing down the results. And so it really helps to grab a friend or 2 or 3 to help with this, or even have a few teams out doing different parts of the lake rather than trying to take it all on yourself. So think about that. We found that volunteers that teamed up with others, we collected data on this. Actually, you are more likely to complete the sampling, more likely to submit data, more likely to keep doing it, and more likely to have fun doing it. Having materials to help people know what is involved, I think, was really important. We encourage you, if you're trying to talk other people into getting involved with the Aquatic Plant Watch, is to share the brochure that we have, the boater's guide for invasives. We have fact sheets, the watch list. It just kind of shows the benefits of getting involved with the program if you're trying to talk somebody into getting out on the lake with you. There's also the fun of just being out on the lake and doing something that helps the lake. You can get creative. Obviously, your lake association, if you have one, is a source of volunteers, but there's a lot of other groups, including gardening groups, master gardeners. A lot of people interested in plants don't necessarily have a chance to experience aquatic plants from a boat. And, they might know their wetland plants, but maybe haven't spent time looking at submerged aquatic plants. So I'm very excited to get involved with that. And even the MSU Extension Conservation Stewards Program, their participants are always looking for volunteer opportunities to help conservation programs. So there's lots of ways to find people to help you out if you're struggling with that. All right, that's it. We've gone through the protocol. Here's an example. Actually, the person there hanging off the back of that pontoon has a sampling rake that she is pulling along. And so we encourage you to, we have a few minutes yet to ask questions. I know a few things have come into the chat, and we can talk about that too now. But that's the end of the slideshow.
Okay. And I guess, Joe, we'll just kind of both answer these questions. I'll read them off.
All right.
Does raking capture floating and rooted plants?
Great question. Mostly for rooted plants. Depends on how good your throw is to catch the floating plants and if you're in shallow water. And so when you're looking for things like European frog bits, the visual survey is actually probably more effective than just blindly throwing a rake and hoping to snag a few of those floating frog bit leaves.
Are native plants protected?
Yes.
They sure are.
Shall we say more? Yeah. So Yes, and yes, and yes. So there's a number of ways of thinking about it, like protection, right? So in Michigan, you're not supposed to disturb the lake bottom. You're not supposed to remove aquatic vegetation in most cases without a permit. Both of those things are important and require permits. Small scale removal of aquatic plants for a swimming area or for boat movement by a property owner is acceptable and does not normally require a permit if it's done by hand, mechanically. If any chemicals are applied, then permits are required. And of course, there are some aquatic plants that are protected in terms of being particularly rare or threatened. And so we definitely, through our work, want to minimize disturbance of the lake bottom and of aquatic plants. But by dropping a rake here and there, in most cases, you're not disturbing them to the point where it would be considered a violation of any protections.
And I would just tack on kind of expanding what we mean by protected is even moving away from what the law requires and just kind of expanding what Joe said. Native aquatic plants are really cool. And oftentimes Joe and I we would give another presentation on native plants, how to identify them, all these things. But there's a tremendous amount of benefits that we didn't cover in this presentation of native aquatic plants. So, protecting them is important because they do so much for a lake. Oh, so this is just some clarification here. I see. So why is the first year fee $250?
Okay. So let me clarify on that. That's not what we're talking about here. We normally offer, as Eric was just suggesting, we offer the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch. And I think that's $30. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now. Yes, $30. And that includes us like looking at your photos if you need questions, like supporting you throughout the whole season. We also, in most years, would offer what we call aquatic plant mapping. And that is a much more intensive program that teaches you how to go out and map all of the aquatic plant species in your lake, native and invasive. And that's a big undertaking. And we do a class about it, but then we also will come out and spend a day with you in the field. We come to your lake, and that's why it costs more, because you're paying for our gas and things like that. So, and it doesn't matter where you are. If you're in the UP, actually, we're excited to come up there, but wherever we'll come to you. We are not offering that this year for new participants because of COVID restrictions. It's really challenging for us to do those in-person visits. So we're not training on that. We're not offering that. We do have a few lakes that have done it in the past, and we've gone and visited them, and they're doing follow-up sampling without us. That's like $50. It's a lot cheaper because it doesn't require that travel. But think of it for next year if you're really interested in learning more about your aquatic plants.
For sure. Here's one about other data. How do we submit hand-drawn plant surveys done by herbicide applicators or engineering firms? Are you interested in this past data?
Officially, the CLMP is not interested in that data. We are structured such that we only accept data collected by our volunteers following our protocols. It's really useful information for you. And so keep it, hold on to it. It's a record that you can use for comparing against any data you have, but we're not built to be a repository for data collected in other ways.
Is coontail native? Yes, it is. So I need to scroll now for a little bit here.
While you're doing that, Eric, I'm going to put a link in the chat that, you mentioned some of the trainings we've done for aquatic plant ID. And we did one last fall for the Michigan Inland Lakes Convention, and it was recorded. It was an online training on aquatic native plants. It's about 2.5 hours long, but you can fast forward if you want. But if you want to check that out, I'll put the link in the chat in case you want to check out that recording.
Okay. What are examples of rare aquatic plants?
Eric, do you want to take that first?
Sure. There's a handful so there's rare plants, and then there's actually like listed rare plants, meaning they're threatened or endangered or concern.
Special concern.
Special concern, thank you. And so there are a handful of those. Maybe a very popular one would be that people would maybe know of are water lotus. So those are like our water lilies, but they can get huge leaves. We have them in only a select few water bodies in Southeast Michigan and maybe Southwest. But that's an example of a threatened. It's an actual status for that plant. But there's a handful. There's a handful of pondweeds that are rare, and they start to get away from having common names. So I don't know, like Potamogeton diversifolius, that
Got
plant.
that, you guys?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I don't know if it has it probably does have a common name. It's just that's less known. And so there are a handful of rare plants out there. And if you are interested in seeing Michigan native plants with some little commentary, check out Michigan Flora. First of all, you can get it as a book, and it's pretty hardcore. You really have to love plants to go into it. But Michigan Flora is all online, and so you can find all the plants that are found in Michigan, and so you'll be able to investigate some of that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Joe.
I would just say that, I mean, there's also plants that are kind of locally rare. Like you just, even though where they're found, they might be abundant. You just like, oh, wow, this is a lot. There's a dwarf milfoil that basically looks like microscopic asparagus, and it gets about this high, and it doesn't even have leaves that you can really see. It just looks like a lawn on the bottom. And people sometimes will pull that up and wonder what the heck it is, and then are even more surprised when they learn it's a native milfoil.
For the Plant Watch, do I only need to know that short list of invasives?
Those are the 5 that we really have you focus on. And you can do it with just those 5. And that's where we're asking you to focus, because those are the 5 plants that are either the biggest threat or most likely to find them and cause impacts to your lake at this time. But if you want to take it a step further, we would encourage you to review that state of Michigan watch list of other plants that may be emerging invasives for Michigan. Because again, early detection is really valuable.
Is the presence of Cara a good water quality indicator? And I think you can maybe flip that around in that Cara might be creating good water quality. And so Cara is great at carpeting the bottom of a lake, so keeping sediment in the sediment and not resuspended. It also really competes with floating algae for nutrients, because it's pulling nutrients from the water, just like little microscopic algae are, so they can outcompete them. And then also there's some evidence that they produce chemicals that inhibit the growth of algae. So all of those things, so Cara doesn't represent good water quality, but they might be producing good water quality. Does the Michigan Native Flora Inventory, MNFI, list endangered native aquatic flora? Yes.
Yes, it can be a little tricky to find it, because they basically just have a list of all the plants, and they're not necessarily divided out by aquatic. So you might have to, do a little sleuthing to figure it out and narrow it down to that list. But yes, they have all that on their website.
And that's the MNFI, Michigan Natural Features Inventory.
Yes. I'll put a link in the chat for MNFI.
Perfect. And I should just mention, I have this because it's like next to me. So I should, there's a lot of, if we were doing a plant class, you'd see all,
put it really close to your chest like this. There it is.
There we go. I hug it anyways. This is a great book for beginners for aquatic plants. This is out of the University of Wisconsin Extension, called Through the Looking Glass. It's a great resource that has a lot of great images, like drawn images that show the different characters of the aquatic plants really well. So you can take a peek at that. You can get that from, you can go to Amazon, but you can get this directly from UW Extension's bookstore. And you can find this book along with other books that are great for aquatic plant identification. Hugging books.
I do it too.
There's a lot of things coming in here, so I just need to, if you mechanically remove invasives, what is the best way to dispose of them?
Great question. And I actually put a link to this resource in the chat a long time ago during today, so I'll put it in again. But the state actually wrote a really nice citizen's guide to invasive plant disposal. So you can look at that PDF and it goes through all the different types, aquatic and terrestrial, and the safest way to dispose of them.
Do we need permits to add any plants that are native to a lake? So I would definitely suggest, if you want to do that, reach out to your Eagle land and water interface permit staff. Joe, there's a map that they can, I don't know if you can.
I should be able to grab it, yeah.
Because there's a few questions they're going to have. In some circumstances, no. If you're moving a plant from one part of your shoreline to another, and you're not causing, and you're using just hand tools or your hands, and you're not causing great disturbance to the bottom sediments, I believe, and I say I believe because I'm not an Eagle representative, that would not require a permit. However, if it's a bigger project where you might be using some equipment, that might be determined to need a permit. But I'm making an assumption, but I work with Eagle folks all over the place, and Tamara can step into is there's planting native aquatic plants is a great practice and is a best practice. And so there's support to make that happen. So I'm guessing staff would love to answer that question. I'm just going through.
I don't have anything more to add to that because I'd have, like you said, the land and water interface staff. I did find that link though, if you want me to post that in the chat.
That'd be helpful, Tamara, because I'm having trouble on the fly finding that state resource.
Yeah, I can post that. I found it real quick. So because those are my go-to people for questions like that when it comes to what's permitted and what's not permitted. I always go to the permitting staff.
Yeah, and if it is a permit, again, if the project is fairly minor, it'll be a minor permit category, which is easy to get and is cheap. Are zebra mussels impacting water clarity and/or invasive plant populations?
Yes.
Sure,
So yes,
yes.
zebra mussels are amazing water clarifiers. They're filter feeders. So they digest and eat floating bits of algae and other things that are in the water. And, you know, you can take a bunch of zebra mussels, throw them in a tank of cloudy water and it'll become clear. So yes, they impact water clarity. And so what that does is lets more light get down through the water column into deeper areas where it couldn't before. So that makes areas of the lake that maybe were too deep and dark for plants to grow now open to plant growth. And so who is good at colonizing new areas? Invasive species. And so when all of a sudden there's a lot more lake bottom that can support plant growth, you may see, especially if there's already invasive plants in the lake, they may take advantage of that new habitat before native plants can move in and get in there. And we also see that there's I've seen this relationship in that we have often where you have Eurasian milfoil, you have zebra mussels too, and they seem to really like to attach to it. The small ones do. And so you'll pull up Eurasian milfoil and be covered with baby zebra mussels. So I think the milfoil is actually encouraging the zebra mussels, which then clarify the water, which will make more habitat for the milfoil and so on for that. So that's one example where yes, the zebra mussels could encourage more aquatic plant, invasive plant growth.
Okay, do you need a permit to add sand to a beach? Likely so, but I would encourage you to reach out to your Eagle representative. And I think Tamara said it might be out there. She might have added it to the comments already. So this is your local Eagle land and water.
Oh, I see. She put it in. She put it into our Teams because her Zoom locked up. So let me get it here for everyone.
Perfect. If you want to improve your lakeshore property and you have questions about if you need a permit or not, or if you want to just talk through some of the details, click on that website and chat with your Eagle folks. They're great to kind of bounce some ideas off of. Okay, I think I think I've been able to get to most of them. Sorry if I've missed. There's a lot of things going through here. So if it's 4:30, thank you for the 100 or so people plus who are still on. And I look forward to next year and all these times when we can meet with each other and do these face to face, and you can hold the plants in your hand while we learn them. Anyways, Joe, do you have any other sign
Yeah.
offs?
So again, I'll swing back again. I'll say there's always so much energy, and actually, you know, we've been thrilled with the turnout at today's session. I'm really pleased. We hope that means that we'll get a lot of lakes enrolled. And I get a little email in my inbox every time somebody sets up their user profile or enrolls a lake. And I have seen just today 35 people setting up their accounts. I have seen 7 lakes have completed enrollment. So if you got stuck on that loading, be patient. It can be done. Lakes are getting through. So we're getting lakes enrolled in the program for the year, which is thrilling. We're going to be getting your stuff out to you right away if you're still on and can hear this. So yeah, May 10th is the deadline. Holler at us at MiCorps@msu.edu if you have any trouble. We'll help you through it.
And if you have any questions on what to choose for your lake and all those things, feel free to reach out to us or that MiCorps.msu.edu.